Today we're going to go through the best settings for the Asus ROG Swift PG27AQWP-W. This is their 540Hz 27-inch WOLED panel. We'll go through the best settings for both SDR and HDR usage. We'll also take a look at gaming settings, OLED care and everything else as well. So we've got the screen at its default settings to start with, and we're going to set a few things in the general system menu to start. In the system setup section, you'll just want to make sure that the power setting has been shifted to performance mode. It might come out of the box with power saving mode on. Just change that to performance mode. That will give you full access to all the settings. Elsewhere in this section, if you've got a DisplayPort 2.1 graphics card that supports UHBR20, so the full DP 2.1 bandwidth, then you should be able to actually disable DSC if you want to. That's not actually needed on the screen to power the full spec. So only if you've got one of those graphics cards would I recommend disabling DSC. If you've got an older graphics card or a DP 1.4 graphics card, you'll need to leave DSC enabled for the maximum support of 1440p at 540Hz and 10-bit color depth. Elsewhere in the lighting effect menu, you can enable or disable the Aurora RGB, that's the RGB lighting on the back, or the light in motion, which is the RGB lighting on the bottom of the stand. So you can just turn those on and off there if you want. And then in the OLED care menu, we're going to leave as many of these settings turned on as possible. They will help with the mitigation of image retention and burn-in, so leave as many turned on as you can. But if you find any of them problematic during your usage, you could disable them here or turn them down. So for instance, the screen move setting might be a bit distracting to some people for desktop applications. You can turn that down to light, maybe turn that off. The other one that some people might want to turn off is in the screensaver menu, the outer dimming control. That dims the edges and the borders of the screen in some circumstances. So if you spot any kind of vignetting effect or darker borders, darker edges, you can disable that one there as well. You can also set up the Neo proximity sensor. It's probably best just to use the tailored mode for your viewing position. So you can follow through the steps there, and that will set up the proximity sensor and turn the screen off then when you move away from it. That's quite a useful feature for burn-in mitigation. In the game menu, there's a few different things you can enable here. You can turn on and off variable refresh rate if you want to use FreeSync or G-Sync. That's enabled by default. If you want to use the frame rate boost mode to boost your refresh rate even higher, up to 720Hz, then you can enable that here, but it will drop your resolution down to 720p instead of 1440p. There's all the other Game Plus settings here as well, like FPS counter and crosshairs and things, so you can turn those on for gaming if you want. And you may want to experiment with the shadow boost if you're playing a lot of darker games or viewing a lot of darker movies or content. You can turn that up, experiment with that and see which one you like the look of if you need to, but we'll leave that off for now. Most people will probably want to leave that turned off for general desktop usage. The game visual menu gives you access to the different preset modes. It's on racing mode by default. We're actually going to use the user mode to calibrate the screen, so we'll switch to that here. And then in the image and the color section, this is where we're going to make the majority of the changes. So we'll start in the image section. We're going to turn uniform brightness on. That will just ensure that you get a nice consistent brightness for desktop applications and general usage. You may want to turn that off for some SDR gaming perhaps. That will give you a bit of a boost in brightness, but you will have to live with some ABL dimming. So I think for most people you'll probably want to leave it turned on. The screen can still reach pretty high levels of luminance anyway in SDR, so we'll leave that turned on. For the brightness control, we get people moaning about this all the time for some reason, despite what we say in these videos, so I'll say it again. You can set this at whatever you feel is appropriate for your ambient light conditions, your user preferences, your content. We're reluctant to give specific recommendations here, but if you wanted to configure the screen to common target luminance levels, you could use a setting of 26 for 120 nits, 32 for 150 nits, or 46 for 200 nits. Like I say, set this at whatever you like, whatever you find comfortable. We'll leave it on 46 for now while we do the rest of this video, so that should be around 200 nits. Contrast we'll leave on the default 80. If you want to turn on the OLED anti-flicker mode, if you experience any kind of flicker during VRR gaming situations, you can do so here. Everything else in this section can be left on its default. And then in the color menu, this is where we're going to have a couple of different options. So you can choose to either leave the screen running in its full native wide color gamut, or you can cap it slightly and clamp it to the DCI-P3 color reference, or you can clamp it even further for the sRGB color space. I think most people will maybe want to use two different modes. The full wide gamut mode, which will give you the most vivid and saturated colors for gaming and multimedia. If you like that kind of appearance, then just leave it on the wide gamut mode. If you want a more accurate SDR setup with less saturated, less vivid colors, more natural looking colors for SDR content, then you might want to switch to the sRGB clamp mode here as well. What you could do as well is set one of the game visual modes. The user mode you could set up for the full native color space, and then you could use one of the others, like let's use the racing mode. We could set that up to the sRGB color space instead. And then what that means is you can just switch between those two game visual modes if you want, between racing and user, depending on your preference. We'll stick to the user mode for now, and we're going to use the full wide color gamut. Color temperature, we're going to switch to the user mode, and we're going to configure this to a setting of 99 for red, 99 for green, and we'll leave blue on 100. We found that just tweaked the white point slightly and gave us a white point a little bit closer to 6500 Kelvin. So that's a minor adjustment there that you might want to make. Gamma we'll leave on 2.2, everything else can stay as it is in this menu. And then the screen will be running in its full native color space. You may also want to try out our calibrated ICC profile. We'll link to that in the description below. That will clamp the gamut back to the sRGB color space in color aware applications. So that way you can get the best of both worlds. You can have the wide gamut operation for games and multimedia and general usage. And then in certain applications where you want to use it, it will clamp it back to the sRGB color space for SDR applications and more accurate usage that way. You can either do that if you want to use our calibrated profile, or like I say, you can just switch between the game visual modes and set two up for different color spaces if you want. Another thing that you may want to experiment with is Asus's Display Widget Center software. Now we've been using that quite recently, and it's a great way actually to quickly change the settings or flick between different preset modes. You can download that for free from the Asus website. You've even got access to some advanced features like window alignment and settings, and you've even got some additional functionality in there that will switch between different preset modes depending on the application that you're using. So we've got an article on our website about that you might want to check out if you want to know more, but we found that quite a useful way of changing the settings and switching between different modes for different uses. We've now enabled HDR in Windows. As a reminder, we'd only recommend enabling HDR when you're going to view actual HDR content. We've got a video linked in the description below which explains all the reasons why, but only enable that setting in Windows when you're going to view actual HDR content. You'll see that the menu switches to the HDR mode now, and a lot of the sections are actually grayed out, so color is grayed out, a lot of the image sections are grayed out. But what we'd like to do is come into the HDR setting menu and enable adjustable HDR. You'll then see that all of these settings in the image menu are available, the color menu is available, and that just allows us to tweak things a little bit more for HDR usage. We think most people will prefer to use the console HDR mode. We found that to offer the highest brightness, the most impactful HDR experience, and generally the best balance between EOTF tracking and brightness. So we switch to the console mode. You might also want to come in here and increase the brightness up to its maximum 100. That will give you access to the full brightness capabilities of this panel and give you the most impactful HDR experience. So we'll increase that to 100. We'll leave contrast on 80. Uniform brightness should be disabled in HDR mode. And then in the color menu, we're going to stick to the 6500K mode. That's a very accurate mode in HDR, so we'll stick to that. All of the OLED care settings are uniform across both modes, so you'll see that they're still on the same settings that you made earlier, so no need to change that. And that is the screen setup in HDR. So we've done both SDR and HDR modes. You can find a link to our calibrated ICC profile in the description below, a link to our full review of this screen as well. If you found this video useful, please just give us a quick like, that'd be really appreciated. Thank you for watching, we'll catch you next time.